is going to tell you how to make some of your tools, specifically the thame, or what some people call the athame, and your ankh. The directions for these are all contained within Lecture 5. There are many, many other things that you can make for your altar and for your circle. You can make your own candles. You can even make your own chalice if you're into pottery or into metal turning or even wood turning. There are many beautiful wooden chalices. Follow the directions as to the measure in the book as carefully as you can. But you don't have to follow all the directions slavishly. Use your head. If there's an easier way, do it that way. For instance, you don't have to go out into the woods to find a piece of tree limb, but it's a nice thing to do. It gets you out into the woods at least. You could instead use an offcut like this from a table leg, and this would make a very nice handle for your athame. We're going, in this tape, to talk about two things. We're going to talk about the ankh, and this is the ankh that we made for the demonstration. You can see it's quite a handsome piece of work. It didn't take very long. It took a little time to go and get the willow fronds, and of course we had to tell the man there that we were making a carpet beater for a church project. But apart from that little white lie, it came out very nicely. I would say that the actual work involved was less than 2 hours. Probably the most difficult thing to make is your ritual knife. Remember, this has to have a light-colored handle, never black. This is the old surgeon's knife, so it has a cutting edge and it has a point. It's not a stabbing knife, so don't make this point come down to a stabbing point. Provided you get the length right, and provided you stay with a light-colored handle and engrave the symbols in the right direction, then it will pass. We used very simple tools in making all these objects. Just a clamp, a hacksaw, a wood saw, tape measure. You'll see we used a yardstick, some chalk, a few nails, a piece of wood, all things that you can get very easily. There's no difficulty in them. And have fun doing it. If something gets to be a bore or a problem, put it aside, start again, and have fun, because otherwise the tool will not feel good when you use it, because you will remember that you cut your finger when you did this. Now I have to say that if an 80-year-old grandmother in an apartment in New York can make beautiful tools, far better than this, sitting at her kitchen table, then you people out there shouldn't have to make excuses to us for why you can't do as well. Lecture 5 has in it all of the things you need to know about how to do the work and mark out the pieces of material you will get for the athame, the ankh, and several other tools. For the athame, you will need a blank of aluminum or other non-ferrous metal. The school sells such a blank together with an extra short piece that you will use to make the guard. The dimensions in the book are quite specific. They are shown in hundredths of an inch, and we're going to go to some over-the-shoulder shots to show you how to mark out your material. Here we see lecture 5, and if we look in it, you will see the dimensions for their theme, and as you can see, they are quite clear. These are done in hundredths of an inch. Shows the blade and the tang. The lower illustration shows the crosspiece. And we need to mark that on the blank that we're going to use. There is a table on page 4 that converts these hundredths of an inch to sixteenths of an inch and even to the metric system. Here, if we look just at a child's ruler, we can see the inches quite clearly, and as this is divided in its main sections are 1/8. So the 15/16 is going to have to be just between the 3 7/8 and the 4-inch mark, right where I'm marking it with the pen now. To transfer this to the blade is really simple. We just put the bluer on the blade and slide it over a little bit so you can see it. Then the end of the blade is right at 3 15/16. See how it's between 3 7/8 and 4 inches. Then we need to mark on the blade with an ordinary marker pen, just like that. Here we just have to cut off a little piece of tang, so we don't have to be too accurate about how much we're going to cut off. Draw a line and then mark it to show that that is waste metal. In the same way, we mark the length of the blade. First we look at the book and we see we need 4.675. Looking at the table again on page 4, it says 4.675 is 4 11/16. Go back to our ruler and find out where 4 11/16 is. There's 4 1/2, that's 8/16. So we need 3 more 16ths. So if we go 1/8 and a 1/16, that will be 4 11/16. Put that on the mark, on the tang, and then we just need to mark the end of the ruler, because this is for the point. We don't have to mark it right across. The marking pen we're using is rather thick for the video. When you're doing it, you should use something rather thinner. Anything that will mark nicely on the aluminum. See, mark the end there. Now we have to mark now the cut of the blade, but it's just a curve. It's nothing very accurate. the only thing that has to be very accurate is the length. See those curves we have to mark in? We just do this freehand. The cutting side is opposite the side that we cut off for the tang. We just freehand the curve on there, just nice and easily. No big deal. Make it obvious that it's not a dagger, it's not a stabbing instrument, and mark very carefully the pieces you're going to cut off. You can use any sort of ruler that you happen to have handy. Here's a tape measure, and this is rather nice because it's already marked out in 16ths that you can count one by one. See, there's 3 and 15/16. That's very clear, 1/16 less than 4 inches. That table on page 4 in the lecture also includes metric, because some of our students are overseas, and the French system of measure is used by many, many countries. France metric is the second most common usage, and we may even transfer to it in the United States. Here you can see 10 centimeters, 10.5 centimeters, and all those little divisions are tenths of centimeters or millimeters between them. Need to set the blade on one side for just a moment and think about the guard or the cross piece. All we have to do is cut a little piece of metal out so that the guard will fit onto the blade, and then round off the corners. Now this little piece of metal is exactly 2 inches in size. You can mark these off. You could get a quarter or something if you want a better curve and mark around it. Just cut those, mark those, and then mark the little pieces that we're going to throw away. Finding the middle is quite simple. This piece is 2 inches long, so the middle is at 1 inch. We need to cut a slot for the blade to go into it, so we'll just make a wide mark with our marking pen right down the blade, right down the guard, I'm sorry. Now we can compare that with the width of the blade and see whether it's too wide or not, and see we have to cut it on the inside of that because the mark is a little wider than the blade. So there it is, marked out, and now we're going to have to flip over to cutting it. Here we are. Now we happen to have an old workbench to cut it on, but you could equally well take the board that you're going to use to mark out your ankh, and what you need to do is clamp it to it. Any sort of board will do. A C-clamp is a very nice thing to have to put it on there. Just clamp it right down on there. Now, as I fasten this clamp, many of you metal workers will say, well, you should put something between it and the blade, and that's right. I would have got no marks on the blade from it if I'd put a little piece of wood on it, and I needed to realize that I had to put the clamp on the other way up because it would be in the way of the saw when I started to cut. Any sort of piece of plywood or odd wood you can find. Now we use a hacksaw here to cut this off. If you've got friends with power tools, well, you can get them to do it for you. Remember, you can't pay them, but you should do something nice for them. Now, getting started with a hacksaw is a little bit tricky, but once you've got that first slot in, you can get it going. A little bit of patience here. Eventually the blade will cut in there enough that you can cut it very quickly. The aluminum is quite soft. You can see that we jumped down a little bit so as not to waste time. Here we're cutting off the little bit for the tang. Then that last little bit down towards the end, and the small waste piece falls out. Now let's turn it around and cut out the little pieces that we're not going to need. You can see I'm not very much of a metal worker. Cutting these little pieces out helps us by not having to file quite as much, although the filing really doesn't take too much time. Keep clamping the blade so that it doesn't mark it. But you're going to polish the blade anyway, hopefully, and when you do. Now for the other side. That's the rough cut on the blade. Now we need to carry on to cut the slot in the guard. The guard is usually more difficult to hold just because it's small, and so be careful here. You really don't want to cut your fingers. Remember, we need two cuts, but we have a little piece of metal left between the two. And we want to cut on the inside of that mark so that the blade will fit it nicely. Return this a little bit now. Adjust it a little bit so that we can cut those tiny corners off and save ourselves some more filing. I don't know about you, but the sound of the saw hurts my ears, so I'm going to leave it off. All of this work can be done with All of this could of course be taken off with the file or the grinder, but this is just gets the bulk of the metal out of the way, so we have less work to do in finishing. Now for the other end. You can see it's a little bit difficult to hold, but it's not the end of the world. And the C-clamp is a very useful tool here. A pair of vice grips could also be used if you were holding it down to a thinner piece of metal. Uh-oh, this piece really doesn't want to come off, so I'll come around and have a go at it the other way. The American Indians say that if something doesn't want to go the first time, you should try it a maximum of 3 times before you set it on one side. Because if it doesn't come out in 3 times, then you have to figure some other way of going at the problem. Now we need to get that little piece of metal out that I left. This is usually not very difficult to do. Clamp it down so that I can get at it again. Widen it up a little bit, widen the saw cuts a little bit to make it easier. Just try and push it out with a piece of the tang. See, you can see it coming out now. It's a stubborn little piece. Ah, yes, that's the right width. That's good. So that shows that the two will fit quite nicely together. There, see? They're fitted there together, and we can see it quite clearly. Get a good look at how this fits against the end of the tang. See? Right in the step now is to start with filing off the excess metal so that we can give it a sharpened edge and a smooth finish. So we clamp it down again, and we use a half-round, fairly coarse file. We need a fairly coarse file because the aluminum is quite soft and it will come off very quickly, well, relatively quickly, if we use a file like this. It may take us anything up to 15 minutes to do this. So if you get bored in the middle, then just stop and have a glass of your favorite beverage. Coffee, tea, iced tea, wine, beer, who cares? Just take it easy, don't get bored with it, because if you get bored with it, then those boring vibrations will get into the blade and be ever with you. Just keep moving it round so that you can get at it. Remember to put a sharp edge along the one side there and round the end nicely. You can see the filings falling onto Yvonne's carpet. I'll probably be in the doghouse for that. I have to get at the bottom end of the blade there so I can take that sharpened edge all the way along. Now, how can I do that? Oh, there. That's the piece I need to get at. There we go. Patience, patience, patience. The I Ching might say, the gentle wind, gentle persuasion rather than sudden force. Again, if you have a power grinder, you can use it. It's kind of nice to file it away gently. This is the sort of meditative task that our ancestors were very good at. Whether it was following the plough or husking corn or whatever it was, they had time, and while they were doing this sort of task, they naturally meditated. Nobody had to tell them how to do it or give instructions. It was part of their daily life, where they had more time than we do to do meditative tasks. You can see how that aluminum is just coming off so quickly. Keep that end nice and rounded. If you were using bronze, this would be a rather harder task. If you were using brass, it would be about the same. Just keep doing it smoothly. Once you've got most of it off, you can do some fine finishing to get a nice smooth line along the edge where it's sharp. You're not going to cut anything with this. This is a sacred knife, so it doesn't have to be all that sharp. Uh-oh, there are the marks I made with the clamp. 60 lashes, Gavin, for not using a wood block to hold the blade. Still, this is only the third one of these I've ever made. And Yvonne did a lot of work on hers. The next step is to smooth out all those file gouges with some fine sandpaper. Get a sheet of fine sandpaper. Remember to keep on turning it. And take off all of the ink marks from the pen and the surface of the aluminum. Aluminum comes to you anodized, and if you're using brass or bronze, the surface will already be oxidized. So you need to take that off, because the etching acid won't attack it, won't attack the metal evenly if it's left on. See, sandpaper takes that off quite quickly. It's beginning to get that nice silky look that aluminum takes on. You have to do this to the guard too. I'm sure you're bored watching me attempt to sand out the marks I put on the blade. We need a piece of wood about the same length as the tang, and I got a branch off an old tree, and you can see here that it's got a narrow piece, which looks about right, and a wider piece. Don't use a wider piece because it will make the tool very not ugly, but just cumbersome, if you like. So use the smallest piece, the piece which is about the same width as the blade of the athame, and just cut it off with your handsaw. Take the piece you didn't use and throw it in the wood box. You don't need to go back to a ruler to measure this, just measure it directly against the blade, remembering that you have to allow for the guard. There. What could be easier? Just a few moments with a handsaw, and now we'll take a few moments to cut a slot in it the other way. Want to hear a handsaw working? Here you are. That's kind of softer than the file, or the hacksaw, I guess. But still, since we don't have to have that microphone on, we won't. You have to cut this little piece of wood down deep enough so that the tang is level with the wood when it's finished. Here's the second cut starting. We make it parallel to the first one. The same, and with enough width between the two for the tang. Now I know the perfectionist would be saying, well, you should be wearing gloves and a mask and all sorts of things when you're doing this. But using hand tools like this, I don't think you need to use very much. That little piece of wood should almost fall out. Uh-oh, it doesn't want to. Let's see what we can persuade it with. Well, we've got the athame blade here. Will that do it? No, it really just doesn't want to come out. So I guess I'll have to get my trusty wood knife. It really is in there tight. Let me try cutting it a little bit more since my knife isn't here at the moment. It still doesn't want to come out. This will be known as the piece of wood that always stayed home or something. There, finally it came out. Now I still have a little bit of mess in the bottom of the slot, so I'll clean it up with the saw. Now let's see how that slot fits on the tang. Oh, look, that fits fairly nicely. Maybe need to cut just a little bit more out. Oh, that's getting much closer. I think that looks pretty nice, don't you? Beginning to look like quite a handsome magical tool. The next step is to put the appropriate engraving on the blade of the athame. Before you do that, of course, you need to know your birth sign, and you have to work out what your name number is. Remember, this is your coven name, it's your secret name, and it's one which you don't use with anyone else. Again, in Lecture 5, I'm going to go now and get my bain-marie, as the French call it, which is the pot with the wax melted in a saucepan of water. You can melt wax on the stove in a saucepan of water quite easily. Only requires boiling water. This is just an old tin can for some cranberry sauce that we've melted down the candles from the coven use. Oh, there's Grandpa striking in the background. All we have to do now is dip the blade in the wax, and because the blade is cold, in order to get a good seal between the wax and the blade, we need to leave it in there for a few moments until the aluminium gets good and warm. We can take it out and let the wax drain back into the pot. It does look like an odd color. That's the result of all sorts of different candles we used. Now, as it cools, it will set, and we can see whether or not we've got a good, complete, even coating of wax. We can see here that it's not quite even. On a hot day, you might want to put the tang of the blade into some ice so that it will cool the wax more quickly. I think I'm going to dip this one again, because you really have to make sure that the wax is completely covered. So let's give this one another dip. You can do this quite quickly now, because the wax will adhere to the other wax. And then we just have to let it cool, and we're sure then we've got a complete coating. Okay, see, now we need to go to our Lecture 5. So we make sure that we get the signs on the blade in the correct order. I'm pointing with the sacred nail, which I will later use to scratch these through the wax onto the blade. Make sure they're in the right order so that when the blade is stabbed into the ground, the symbology is correct. On one side of the blade now I'm going to put the sign of the sun by scratching a circle in the wax. Make sure it goes all the way through. Then above that, put your birth sign. Here I'm going to put an Aries sign, making sure all the time that you go down to the metal. And above that I'm going to put a pentagram. Notice that the point is upward. As you do this, you can both see the wax being taken away and you can feel the metal with the end of your sacred nail. On this side we're going to put the moon. Above the moon we're going to put the number of your magical name. And above that we're going to put the double S intertwined for spirit and soul. If you make a glitch as you're doing this, just dip it in the wax again and start over. That's all we need in the wax. The next step is to etch this. I'm going to take this blade outside to etch it with muriatic acid. Step, you need to put on rubber gloves, goggles, and have a glass of water standing by. A breathing mask won't help because the fumes of the acid will go straight through it. A wet cloth over the nose and mouth might help. If you get any acid on your clothes or on your skin, go away promptly and wash it off, or take some water from the glass and throw it on it. Here is muriatic acid. It's from any hardware store. It's used in the building trade to get rid of cement stains on brickwork. This acid has been used before to clean glass, clean lime deposits off glass, so it's probably not as strong as the new acid that you buy from the store. And all you have to do is dip the blade in it. As you watch, you'll see bubbles start to come up from the area that you have scraped clean with your sacred nail. This will take anything from 5 to 10 minutes. If it's a very cold day, of course, it will take a little longer. After about 5 minutes, take the blade out of the acid and wash it off in the water. The etching will be done when you can see black under the areas that you cleaned. Now if it's not complete, you can take your nail and widen some areas, like in that double S there, and in the 5, and in the bottom of the moon, you can see some areas that need to be scratched again. So put it directly back in the acid and let it etch a little longer. I'm going to go get some hot water. That's the same one that I heated the wax in, if you remember, and a bunch of paper towels. I put the blade in the hot water. Take a handful of paper towels and wipe the wax off the blade. The water isn't quite deep enough, so I guess I'll tip the saucepan so that I can get the rest of that wax off. If you've used beeswax alone, you will find it's very sticky. Now we can see the etching, the sun, the sign of Aries, and the pentagram on one side, and on the other the moon, the name number, and the double S. I'm going to put a little ink in, and now you can see the etching more clearly. I probably should have let it etch a little longer so that that double S was more deeply in. Now our final steps are getting close, and the first thing to do is glue the blade and the handle together. But before that, I'll get some of this junk out of the way. All we need is a plastic bag and some 2-part glue. Tip didn't want to come off, so we had to use a little force. Now it's off. We can squeeze some of the glue out onto the plastic. Mix the 2 parts together. And put some down in the slot of the handle, making quite a mess of it as I do it. I probably should have kept the rubber gloves on. Especially if you're allergic to this type of glue, do keep those gloves on. There the tang fits into the glue. Now take some of the glue and put it on the end there, on both sides. Make enough room for the guard to go in. Oh, we need a little bit more. Then the whole thing goes together. Put a little bit more glue in that slot along the back. And I'll use now an elastic band to hold the whole thing together while the glue sets. Just sit it upright like this for a minute so the glue doesn't run out of the slots. It will take a couple of hours to set. It's dependent on the temperature. But I can go away and get my hands clean. Come back and start taking the elastic band off where it isn't stuck down too firmly in the glue. Take that file we had and take off some of the excess glue. Of course, I know all you people are much neater than I am, so you won't have any of this, right? Just keep on cleaning it up. You can see here that I didn't finish up the guard as well as I should have, so I'll have to come back and do that. Now for the next piece of the work, I'm going to sit down, being quite lazy in my old age. You take the waxed linen thread, which was probably sent to you from the school, and the first thing to do is cut about 6 inches of it off so that we can make a loop. The whole idea here is to do it without knots. So we start by taking a piece like that, putting it along the handle and wrapping it over itself. Why is it always more difficult when one is doing it with a camera? See, this holds the thread in place. Keep the thread good and tight and just wrap the blade. I'm not going to bore you with having you watch me wrap it all the way up. This does take a few moments. But just put a single layer of thread all the way up. Magic gets us to the top very quickly. Now take that little 6-inch piece that you cut off before and hold it against the handle. And bind that in. Bind the loop in. See? It's quite easy. Keep it good and tight. Just keep on rotating it. Keep it nice and smooth. The wax linen thread is definitely an advantage because it doesn't slip very much. The wax holds it in place. Don't bind it all the way to the top, because if you do, you'll for sure lose one piece or one wrap at some point. Cut the thread off with anything that happens to be handy, in this case a chisel. Pass it through the loop, pull it tight, and then pull on the loop. See, that will pull that thread down and through, like so, and then all we have to do is cut off that little piece that's hanging. Again, we can do it with the chisel, if it'll come off. This gives us a really neat finish to the binding. There are no knots in it. It's all made of a natural linen thread. Then we go in now and do the final finishing. Go back to our sandpaper and take out any little nicks or marks the acid may have left. The longer you can sit and watch TV and do this, if your significant other will let you. Get it as smooth as you can. You'll find probably some bits of glue left up there at the top, between the guard and the blade. We're not going to finish this one completely because that would be a waste of film time. Once we've got it nice and smooth like this, we can think about polishing the aluminium. And the easiest thing we have found for using that, for doing that, is one of the Comet cleansers that's got grit in it. You don't want a smooth cleaner here. You want one that's got some bite, as we say. Now, if this doesn't work for you, go to your local automotive store and get some grinding paste. Get some fine grinding paste. And this will polish it up quite nicely. Everything has to be polished, of course, the guard as well as the blade. You can see in just these moments that I've been doing it, it's getting very smooth and clean and white. Even this finish is quite acceptable, but you will probably want to do more. And there is your finished magical ritual knife. You've now seen all the steps, except perhaps finishing the guard, that you need to make it. Move on to making the ankh. The first thing you will have to do, of course, is find somebody who has some willow trees and who is willing to let you go there. Here comes Yvonne, driving the truck under the tree. It's a beautiful tree. One well worth our time and trouble of finding. First thing Yvonne does is go and say thank you to the tree and tell it why we are taking some of its fronds. This step just takes a few moments, but it's so very important. We need a nice bundle of fronds, as long as we can get them. So Yvonne is pulling some down before cutting them. Here you can see the length, which is well over 6 feet. She takes them for the trunk, to transportation back to our patio. When we get home, of course, the first thing is that the cat has to be taken care of. Here we have a right-handed cat. No, maybe she's left-handed, taking a pounce out of the can. Yvonne will now strip the leaves from some of these willow fronds. You can see how very long they are. Very soon she has a complete bundle, takes that away and puts it down out of the way while she collects up all of the leaves to go to the compost heap. In all of these efforts, it's important to make sure that you don't waste any of the pieces that you took from the tree. You promised the tree, perhaps, that you would use everything you took. There's that grandfather clock again in the background. Over the job. Bring the willow fronds back and start to work out what we're going to do with them. Using the information in Lecture 5, the first thing to do is make an ankh forming board. This board is made very simply from a scrap piece of plywood and a few nails. I prefer to use aluminium nails, being non-ferrous. In the original lecture, it talks about using dowels, but the nails are somewhat easier. Here we have a trusty yardstick, hammer, nails, bend some old knees down, a marking pencil, and the first thing to do is mark a center line on the board. Now refer to the lecture dimensions and put a couple of nails in, one on the center line at the top and then two further down, 1.5 inches apart. Measure down so that you can get the two nails that will hold the sides of the ankh. You can find all of these dimensions on page 7. These two nails are actually 4 inches away on each side of the center line. Come on down now to the 15-inch point. And put in 2 nails 5 inches apart. Now you have the whole forming board complete. However, I like to put in a couple of extra nails 1.5 inches apart, just below the top. It's now a relatively simple matter to get the bundle of willow and start laying the pieces inside and around the nails. In each case, put the thicker or the butt end down. Now you see why I've got those extra nails, to hold them more firmly. Some of the pieces will probably break, and you can either decide to discard them or keep them and bind them firmly in. It's another fiddly job. Just go on one at a time, until you've got if you've got 2 people to do this, you'll get along a little quicker. There you see a complete bundle all in place. Now while it dries, you need to tie it at the center here so that it'll retain its shape. Again, 2 people would be a great help in doing things like this tying. You're going to have to leave it on the forming board about a week so that it will dry. Don't worry about the pieces that are too long and hanging down. You'll be able to cut those off at any time. While you're waiting for it to dry, you might want to go out in the woods and find a piece of dead branch which has a nice straight piece in it for the cross piece. Keep on tying it around until the bundle is quite firm and tightly wrapped. This piece broke, but we can cut it off here and tie it in, and it won't be noticed. There we are. It didn't take long, and now we'll go to the woods, get the cross piece, and see you in about a week. Here's the complete ankh after it has dried. It's a little cooler day today, even though it's still sunny. We're going to bind the ankh with this cane. You don't need all of that cane, but you can't buy it in small quantities, although the school can sell you a small bundle. So we'll take some of it and we will put it in this bowl of water I've got out here to soften it up. It softens up quite quickly. Right now, as you can tell, it's very springy. Watch, it doesn't really want to get wet, I think. It will soften down though as soon as it gets wet. In addition to the cane, a pair of secateurs to cut off the ankh, oh, and also, of course, a piece of dead wood to make the cross piece from, and take your trusty measuring stick so that you can cut the ankh off to size. Let's go down now and cut off the ankh. It has to be 2.72 feet long, and that is exactly where you put those two forming nails. So we cut it right off there. 2.72 feet translates in Table 4 to 2 feet 8 and 41/64. Now take it off the forming board. We don't have any problem now. Everything came off very nicely. Now we're going to bind the various areas with the cane, which is now softened. We're going to take the cross piece and cut it about 1 foot long. The cross piece has to be 1 foot, It's good to cut the cross piece a little longer, and it's not good to cut it on a nice table like this. So I'll take it away and cut it on the wall. It's cut a little longer than the 1 foot that you really need, so that you have a chance afterwards when you test the ink to make it right. Now you can see the cane has gotten quite limber. You start it by pushing the end of the cane through some of the willow fronds and then binding it quite tightly down. Again, we're emphasizing that you should not try to knot the cane. You can make the cane binding any way you like. You can put nice neat crosses in it any way you like. Finishing it is very easy. You take 2 laps over your fingers and then pass the end of the cane back through the loop that you've made. And you pull it good and tight. Then you need to pull those 2 loops you made down very tight. Pull it tight. Keep on pulling it tight. Make it as tight as your fingers will let you do it. Then just neatly clip it off. There's one side already done. Do the other side the same way. Push it into the bundle. Wrap it tightly. Pull it all together. Two wraps over the finger. Pass it back through and pull it tight, 1 loop at a time. Now let's do the top with another very soft and limber piece of cane. Of course, I had to find the longest one in the whole bundle. Procedure is always the same. Pass it through into the willow fronds and then simply bind it in. Make sure that it's tight all the time. Two more loops. And we've got it threaded back through again. So that again, we don't have to have a knot. Now let's go down and do the butt end. This time we have to take that piece of knotted string off before we can finish it. This one should be very tight. But the fact that you pass the first end through means that it cannot slip down. In order to check the ankh with the cross piece, we need the ankh and the cross piece, and we also need something that we can use for the ankh to rotate about. So we'll just drive a nail into our ankh forming board, and then we will mark around the end of it using a piece of chalk. So here's the ankh and the cross piece and the trusty forming board and my not very trustworthy knees. We'll drive a nail into the ankh forming board. Now let's take the ankh and mark a circle with the chalk around it. I'm increasing the thickness of the chalk so that we can see it with the camera when we're finished. Of course, as you would expect, the board is a little bit in the way of getting it perfect. Now that looks very nice, but it's not right because the ankh, as you notice, isn't against the nail. This is a standard problem in drawing circles. This is the standard circle you would use for personal meditation. Now I'll go back and keep the ankh against the nail this time and reconstruct this part of the circle. A coven circle is made with a grand ankh, which is twice the size of this one, giving a circle of almost 11 feet, but not quite 11 feet in diameter. This one, of course, is 2 megalithic yards, or 5.44 feet in diameter. Making the grand ankh is a very nice group project. You can bind it with gold wire or silver wire or anything else that your coven can afford. Now comes the critical piece. We take the cross piece and starting at any random point, we measure around the circle with the cross piece. I'm going to number them so that when we later come to work with it, I can tell where I am. All this is shown on page 8 of the lecture. You will see here, when I get to the end, that I've actually made the crosspiece a little shorter than standard. Here's 13, here's 14, and here is 15. It came out perfectly at 15. Now, if you want to make it 17, therefore, you have to cut the crosspiece off, and you'll find that it will come out to exactly 1 foot. Of course, it's fun to make one that makes a 15 division circle, because it really makes it very easy to draw pentagrams and triangles and things like that, which seem somehow to be of interest to witches. So if I start every 3rd division, just go around in 3s, pretty soon we have 5 divisions. Now with this short measuring stick, it's going to be a trifle tricky for me to draw the pentagram, because not only is it short, but also the board is in the way. So we're going by guess and by goddess. The cat is interested, of course, until she's attracted away by another lot of pounce. Instead of watching me fumble my way through this, we'll cut to the end. It's finished. Now we can take the crosspiece and bind it into the ankh with the surety that it's going to be acceptable when it gets to be tested by the coven. Push the crosspiece through the willow fronds. Pull it down tightly. And start a crisscross kind of binding with the willow. So you get it good and tight together. Start the same way we always do. Go across now and around the back. And pretty soon you'll get it good and tight. This has to be very tight so the cross piece just won't fall out. Finish it in the usual way, passing it through. Take off the rest of those string bindings. It looks to me as if perhaps it needs another binding in the middle there. You can put on as many as you like. Nobody's going to complain. Very straightforward. Uh-oh, didn't quite get it that time. There.